Hello and welcome to Catholics versus Buckeyes, the show that tries to make the case for Ohio State and Notre Dame's football programs being the preeminent programs in the country. With Brian Inglis, I am Seth Shaner. And Brian, we have some Catholic versus Buckeyes in real life going on this week as some transfer portal folks have made their way up to Notre Dame.
Absolutely. Lots of comings and goings both ways, and they've been competing for talent, certainly in the decades of our lives, and now most acutely in the transfer portal set that I'm sure we'll get into.
Well, the first ball to drop was Quincy Porter. He was a true freshman this past year. He's a five-star receiver. He committed to Notre Dame. And my good friend Tim Daniel immediately texted me. And so if you're listening, Tim, we'll break this down a little bit. But Quincy Porter and then Mylan Graham, a second-year receiver, also he was not a five-star the whole way through high school, through his senior, like through the recruiting process. But he became a five-star right before he signed. He was in the Jeremiah Smith class. Um, let's break these down one at a time because together they obviously both kind of represent this idea of you're basically getting them off of traits and off of their recruiting, ratings because they haven't put much film up.
Indeed, I think both were guys that even last year for Ohio State had a chance to play quite a bit. Mylan Graham, obviously, we saw when Tate and Smith were on the shelf, get in some game action, UCLA, Rutgers, etc. And frankly, it was disappointing. Porter, as we've discussed on this show, like he had a little bit of run early in the year, and then you just didn't see him again. Which there's all sorts of stories behind the scenes about that. But you're right; they both look good in the uniform. Have great split times, running wise, and were players that Ohio State and Brian Hartline, who obviously has a fantastic resume in this regard, were very high on. And so those are great gets for Marcus Freeman and the Irish, in my view.
Yeah, since we talk about both teams on this show, let's go first from the Notre Dame perspective. What are the Irish getting? Now, the Irish are getting two very highly rated receivers. Mylan Graham actually is from Fort Wayne, so he's not from far away there in Indiana. You're getting honestly the best probably two receivers of the Marcus Freeman era as far as traits. Now, they haven't put it on the film yet. We'll get into a few of the other things as far as from a Ohio State perspective in a minute, but Quincy Porter had a chance at one point earlier this past season where he could have staked claim to that number two receiver role that's vacated now by Carnell Tate. So automatically you're getting that, and CJ Carr has to love the fact that he's getting some new Ferraris in the offense there. That's going to be huge for him.
Yeah, both players ostensibly are brought there to start, possibly immediately. And Carr, in his development, is really honing in on being a passer. I know he can make plays outside of structure and running the ball, but in that second half of the year last year, man, he really threw for some yards and some touchdowns. And now he's going to have a lot of options on the outside, which really, I mean, Notre Dame obviously is coming off being a heavy run team because of having such great tailbacks in Jeremiah Love and Kadarian Price. And now I think they're going to open up the offense a little bit and let Carr cook. And these receivers certainly are added into that mixture.
Now from the Ohio State side, let's kind of preface this discussion. All right, there are certain things that if you were a beat writer or somebody like that, you might know some things, but you don't report them because it's not officially fact or something like that. So I'm just going to say this from this perspective: if you were an Ohio State fan and you wanted to make an excuse or you wanted to say, "Oh, that's not that big a loss," we could pick apart both of these guys a little bit and say, "Well, it won't hurt them that much." Now with Quincy Porter, that is, listen, man, as a fan, you watch and you say, "Hey, Carnell Tate missed multiple games. Jeremiah Smith missed 1.5 games, and he came out of games early with an injury, and there were multiple chances to go out there and claim that mantle of being a starter next season as a second-year player." And we don't know. Even I don't think even the savviest of beat reporters who have been on top of this, we don't know exactly why he was scratched from some of those games. There's talk that he had an injury, and that's, if he's hurt, he's hurt. But if you're on the Ohio State fan side of this, you could say, well, Chris Henry Jr. is coming in. I don't think I'm going to be that worried about losing Quincy Porter, even though I thought he was a good receiver.
Yeah, Ohio State people, rightfully so, will always be confident about who they have on the roster in terms of wide receivers, especially depth. Now it's a matter of getting that production on the field because, like you said, that those spots were up for grabs in some of those games in the middle of the year that you were going to win no matter what, but they were still going to chuck the ball around the yard, and we just didn't see much from Mylan Graham
Well,
and Quincy
let's talk about
Porter.
Graham
Did
a second. Porter, on Porter's side, your thoughts,
Yep,
like, on,
yeah,
I think he had a lot more upside than Graham as far
yeah,
as.
absolutely. And Porter again, you just didn't see. Like he had a couple games where you're like, oh man, that 11 in the uni looks great, and he had a couple of catches, and then you just didn't see him after about halfway through the year, and it's a shame because there were snaps up for grabs.
Mhm.
And we're in a day and age now where if we're paying players, then I think criticism is fair game, 100%. And you just never quite got the story. He was always questionable every single week with an injury. We didn't really hear what the injury was, and then you just wouldn't see him out there. And there were rumblings behind the scenes, money, the possibility of a redshirt year. I don't know what's true and what's not, but the bottom line is you and I sort of detailed it even before he announced he transferred that there's just something fishy about the whole situation. And next thing you know, he's in South Bend.
Now, from Graham's perspective, Graham was, I can detail this completely. And actually, to your point, I guess before I move to Graham, there will be a time on this show where we talk about Ohio State's injury report and my theory that it actually hurts the players when they claim it protects the players. That's for another show. But on Graham again, Graham came in for um, like camps. He was at camps, and I remember a guy like Jeremy Birmingham just being blown away by him. And it was almost like Ohio State coaches says, "Hey, let me look at you again. Let me see this again." And they kept bringing him back and bringing him back, and he just was awesome. He wasn't a highly recruited guy at that point going into his junior season. And then as things went, and he rose up the boards, partly because Ohio State liked him so much, but partly because he was so good. And they ended up getting him committed. He comes to Ohio State, doesn't sniff the field as a freshman, which he wasn't expected to. It's like, Jeremiah Smith did, obviously. But as a receiver in that room with Ibuka and guys like that around too, it's fine. Nobody thought, hey, he should be on the field already. Um, and again, we go through things as a fan's perspective, but the next thing I'm going to say is absolutely fact. Okay. He had games when Tate and Smith were still there, but maybe they put him in at a key point in the first half to just see what he could do. And he did drop passes. At least I remember two specifically. And then later in the year, when guys like Smith and Tate weren't on the field as much, Graham wasn't either. And they were playing former walk-ons, or I don't know what we call them these days with the scholarships the way they are, but they're playing former walk-ons instead of Mylan Graham. And Ryan Day was asked about it. And again, Ryan Day's pretty tight-lipped about these guys. And again, we can say this is fact because he said it. He basically said he has to earn it. And what he had done so far wasn't earning it. And as a fan, it's easy to point at those two drops, and people could say, "Well, that's not fair. He's young and all this." I mean, as a Bengals fan, I've watched Joe Burrow lose trust in a young receiver in a heartbeat, and it's really hard to get it back. And that just happens when, to your point, they're earning money now. It's at a high level. They've got to know who they can trust, and we'll get to more on the portal here in a minute. At some point, it just becomes, hey, we couldn't trust them. We're going to walk away from them, or not fight for them when they decide to leave.
Yeah, and anecdotally, there was a play in the first half of, I'm gonna have to stretch my memory. It was either I bet it was UCLA, where he got a lot of run, and they had a consequential third down, and they threw the ball to him on a sideline route, and the cornerback for UCLA just rode him out of bounds, and Stan even tried to throw back shoulder, as I recall, and he was just nowhere to be found. the defensive back for UCLA just completely owned the guy on the sideline. And that's one rep, but it's like, I'm just sorry, a UCLA corner is not, a high leveraged player that you're going to see, from Michigan or Miami or any of the teams you're going to, Indiana. And I just remember in my mind thinking, oh my goodness, he couldn't even get position, let alone catch the ball. He wasn't even close to catching the ball.
Mhm.
And so, that just speaks to the development that the coaches didn't seem to see. And hopefully, from the Notre Dame perspective, they could draw that out of him. Or, hey, he's a young person. There's plenty of time to flourish. But it just did not happen at Ohio State for Mylan Graham.
Yeah, so they're very much two highly sought after receivers coming out of high school. They're 1 year apart as far as age or what high school class they were in. I still say, I mean, certainly Porter got 1 year with Ryan Day and Brian Hartline. Graham got two. I think that's going to be nice for Notre Dame to get that, and then they'll continue to develop. And like you said, they're still young. They could they could play 2 and 3 more years, obviously. But so I think it's good for Notre Dame. And again, there's one issue though I point to, and you lose Brian Hartline as coach if you're an Ohio State fan, um, and you wonder what's going to happen. They had a great receiver class that they still ended up with. Chris Henry Jr., it could be argued, is the reason Quincy Porter's gone, because possibly they foresee that he will be much like Jeremiah Smith and come right in and start. But there's a gap now, Brian, as far as the top of the line recruits that they were bringing in year after year. And there's a gap between Jeremiah Smith and now it goes to Chris Henry of these 2 years where, and again, Smith started from day one, so it feels a little skewed. But that gap right there in experience level and talent could come back to bite them after Jeremiah Smith's gone.
Yeah, certainly. And even immediately, Seth, you think, okay, your number one is the best player in college football, and your number three, Brandon Innes, is a very solid slot receiver, leader type of fellow that can lead the fellas. And so now you're thinking, I just need a number two and a number four. Because really, in high leverage moments, they're not going to play more than four in a game, at least that I've observed. Now, maybe that does change under Brian Hartline, but yeah, to your point, there's going to have to be somebody, and maybe it's Chris Henry Jr. Obviously the recruiting profile will tell you that, but there's going to have to be some other fellas that we have not really talked about that are going to have to kind of bubble up and become productive instantaneously next year for Ohio State, whether that's Jameer Brown, one of those other guys that's sort of been buried on the depth chart that hasn't seen much time. Obviously, Bryson Rogers is gone following Heartline to South Florida. So it's going to be a guy that average fans have not heard of.
Well, and we'll see how that goes. Certainly, the recruiting's still good there, and you'll see how it goes. It's just at the end of the day, in this podcast, again, we don't mean to pit the two schools against each other, but if they get to play again in a playoff in a year or two, you could be playing against these Devin Sanchez could be going up against one of his former teammates that he went against in practice. So that's kind of cool. And it's part of college football. We're going to talk a little more about the portal here in a little bit. James Laurinaitis elected to the College Football Hall of Fame. The ties run deep there as well. He was a teammate of Marcus Freeman. He came to Notre Dame when Freeman went there as a defensive coordinator and served as a grad assistant helping with linebackers before moving back to his alma mater. Well deserved for, in some circles, a 3-time All-American at Ohio State.
Absolutely. And one of the legendary linebackers in the history of Ohio State University. To my knowledge, Seth, I think he's still the all time leading tackler for the Rams franchise,
Mm.
unless he's been overtaken in the last 2 years. So even being a second round pick, obviously was a wonderful pro. But harkening back to his days at Ohio State, I mean, you think about it, 2 of his 4 years, they played for the national championship when he was a starter. He came in sort of a very auspicious moment, if you recall, in 2005 when Bobby Carpenter, who's himself a Buckeye legend, broke his leg early in the game against Michigan. And this freshman kid comes in from Minnesota, who is the son of a wrestling legend, the Road Warrior, and he came in, performed beautifully, and you saw him in the lineup for the next 3+ years. And those were wonderful seasons for Ohio State. Like I said, they made it to the national championship game and lost in disappointing fashion his sophomore and junior year. Stayed for his senior year alongside Beanie Wells, Alex Boone, Brian Rubisky, hopefully to make a run at the title. And Chris Wells gets hurt in the first game, turf toe. They get blown out by USC. End up sort of a 10-3 year where they thought they might go for the national championship. Terrell Pryor was a freshman. So it didn't maybe end as well as he would have wanted, but that doesn't change anything about his career. One of the great Ohio State linebackers of all time.
Yeah, and I think the funny thing is, I made a case to you earlier this season because he did an interview with Paul Keels before the Michigan game this past season, and I headed out to get some food in the pregame and was coming back, and I listened to that interview, and I was ready to drive my car through a wall or run through a wall, as it were. And it crystallized for me right then. All blessings go to Brian Hartline. Have a great career, but in fact, he was on that team as well. And when Terrell Pryor came in, but of the two guys, for me going forward, if one of them were to become Ohio State's head coach, I kind of hope it's Laurinaitis because I think he is more of a CEO type as far as he'll delegate to two coordinators, but he will be the guy who will get guys ready, get players ready. And I think that would be amazing. Now, he had the accolades. He was 3-time All-American, so it's not as if he didn't have the accolades, but I think in college, but especially in the NFL, he came along probably about 10 years too early, Brian, for the NFL, because he wasn't as big as like Andy Katzenmoyer or some of these guys, right? Um, so I think linebackers kind of got a little smaller as we went forward, and I think maybe he would have been even better as a pro, maybe 8 to 10 years later. I don't know what you think about that.
I'm not entirely sure because back then they used also run stuffers more than maybe they do now, where everybody's spreading out the field and a lot of RPOs. Maybe he would have flourished in the RPO game. I could be wrong, but there was a little more straight ahead football played back then.
Mm-hmm.
So at any rate, he had a lot of tackles in the NFL, obviously. So I think it worked out pretty well. Um, but yeah, it's interesting too because think about this, Seth. Think about how much better the linebacker play at Ohio State has been since he
Yeah.
has come, ironically, from Notre Dame. I
But
mean,
there's really a parallel between Hartline and him. I mean, as far as that position group, the position group before Hartline came at receiver was let's get a bunch of athletes and hope they turn out. They weren't. I mean, I remember Austin Mack being like the one route runner, the one guy who played high school receiver that could run routes, and then all these other guys seemed to be just athletes that they hoped could become a receiver, and he fixed that position. Boy, did he! Right. And the linebackers, the same thing. It's earlier in the development, Brian, but yeah, you're right. It's going to be continue to be pretty amazing, and he's getting in living rooms for linebackers that they weren't getting, 5 years ago.
yeah, and think about the critique we had even when Ohio State was doing well in the playoff eras. That like, man, where are the NFL linebackers coming from? I mean, obviously the Baron Browning, Jonathan Cooper, they're both starting very good linebackers in the NFL, but Ohio State didn't always know what to do with them.
Mm-hmm.
And now, Sonny Styles announces he's going pro yesterday, and it's he and Arvell Reese. They start two linebackers nowadays, a different world of college football than when Laurinaitis was there. But they're both going to be top 20 picks in the NFL draft.
Oh yeah, Arvell Reese probably top 10. I want to ask you something. I got bothered by that yesterday. Bruce Feldman at the Athletic does the freaks list every year. We're going to talk about another freak in just a moment. Um, and Sonny Styles has been on that list, but what Bruce has been doing on Twitter lately is he puts that out in August before the season starts. But when one of these guys on his list makes a transfer move or goes pro, he's been, basically, hey, Sonny Styles is announcing he's going pro, blah, 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 blah. Here's what I said about him back in August. Sonny more like to me put out like a statement than he did anything. Like Sonny played 4 years and he doesn't have a COVID year. So I didn't understand that one like that. It's not as if he declared for the draft and leaving early. Do you get that sense? I thought he played his 4 years and that was it.
That's a good point because he did reclassify
Hmm.
and come in early and even got some run in that disastrous Missouri bowl game for about the
But it
first
wasn't
time.
he played special teams and he played
Yep.
in like he exhausted more than 4 games
Mhm.
that season. He played in games. So I just don't think it was even a question. And he went through senior day activities and things like that. So just a quibble there. Let's talk before we get to the guys that are coming back for Ohio State. Um, Notre Dame got another good portal addition, and we can talk a little bit about him because I actually know the guy. Francis Brew is a Thomas Worthington grad here in the suburbs of Columbus, where you and I both live. He went to Pitt. He did a great job. He got on the field immediately as a true freshman. I think he had a sack in the West Virginia game, the big rivalry game they play. And I'm just going to tell you a little bit about him. Francis is a workout warrior. He was on the freaks list as a true freshman. As a true freshman before the season started at Pitt, before the 2024 season, he actually had the program like title as uh, most pounds bench pressed. And so he just does that at his high school here. Coach Piketty had to actually create a new. He didn't even create a. He had a plaque for like the combination of how many pounds were lifted and things like that. And he had 1,000 pounds, 11. This guy went up to 1,300 pounds, and so he just made a special plaque just for Francis. like the other plaques get nameplates on them, right? Where how many guys have we got that have done that? He has a special plaque for Francis. Francis, great kid. He's kind of a late bloomer in football, but you've looked at him a little bit, Brian, and you believe that he could be definitely an NFL player.
Yeah, I was impressed with him in a couple of games I recall watching Pitt this year. And he, again, probably would start, I would imagine, for Notre Dame coming right in the door. I mean, I think that's why you get a guy like that. And I think his pro prospects are wonderful, especially the fact that he'll probably be a combine
Oh yeah,
prolific performer,
yeah.
and I think he can be very productive for the Irish. I think he could be an important linchpin in their defense this year.
Well, and also the connection with this show as well. He did go visit Ohio State and Ryan Day. There was a picture of Ryan Day with Francis and his family. I don't know how seriously that was taken on either side. There were some people here in Columbus who wanted him to come. Now he played at Thomas Worthington. It's not a football blue blood here in the city of Columbus or anything like that. And but he was on teams that made the playoffs, and I think it was the first 500 or better team this century he was on while he was there. So congratulations to Francis. Congratulations to Notre Dame for getting him. He is definitely going to be a factor. I think um, I remember when he went to Pitt, and he's not built. He's much thicker and bigger than Aaron Donald. But the idea of just relentless workout, relentless motor, he possesses that. So I look forward to seeing how he does at Notre Dame. That'll be fun to watch.
Yeah, I would guess he'll fit in seamlessly. I mean, they want to be physical up front, obviously, and he'll be a plugger, but he'll also probably make plays that you wouldn't imagine a guy his size can on the perimeter
Yeah.
because he's so athletic. And yeah, I mean, I think they've gotten a gem there.
Well, and I got to tell you, I'm trying to get a hold of him. I write for a local paper here in Worthington, and the story writes itself because he's going to play for a guy who played interior defensive line, not far from Thomas Worthington in high school, and Luke Fickle. So that story will write itself if and when I get to talk to him. So that hopefully, hey Francis, give me a call. All right. So good news on the Ohio State front as far as guys making decisions not to go pro. Okay. Luke Montgomery, the interior offensive line, Carson Hinsman, 2 out of the last 3 full seasons has been your starter at center. Well, let's talk about him in a second. Like the idea that Josh Padilla may be a better, I don't know. We'll have to see. We'll have to see what the deal is there. Word is Jermaine Matthews and Kenyatta Jackson are also coming back. That officially, I just checked before I started talking about it, is not out there just yet. Austin Saravel, though, left tackle, whom I hope can play more in the interior this coming year, he's back as well. Brian, compare and contrast the theme of the 2024 guys, JTT, Jack Sawyer, Emeka Ibuka, and Travion Henderson, to name a few, and also offensive lineman Donovan Jackson. Um, this is not quite that, is it?
No, the talent level isn't quite that high in terms of early round draft selections that, these fellas delayed, shall we say, by a year. But the fact of the matter is that they've started a lot of games on
Mhm.
really good Ohio State teams. So you have to figure that they're going to start again and be contributors. I think it's very interesting, Seth, on the line, which you and I have discussed on this program, certainly. Now that those three are back, and we've also talked about Josh Padilla, Ian Moore having a little bit of a moment against Miami, and Philip Daniels being back, that's six guys for five starting positions. So it'll be very interesting when camp comes around to see who, in fact, vies for starting spots. And then they like having a swing guy
Mhm.
that they can sort of mesh in when someone gets hurt or if somebody doesn't play well. And so it'll be interesting to see how the dust settles from that competition. But you have to be delighted. I think Kenyatta Jackson is probably the guy I'm most excited about to return because he's just gotten better each year, in my view. And I think they're a little bit lacking on the defensive end position at this point. They're looking for somebody to solidify that group of players and then maybe bring along guys like, Zion Grady, for instance, because obviously they're losing 11 sacks with Caden Curry.
Mhm.
So that type of production has to be replaced. And, I thought Kenyatta had moments of brilliance this year. Obviously, he got knocked unconscious against Texas. And so the beginning of the year was a little dicey for him. But man, he showed out at the end of the year, in my view. I think he was silenced a little bit by Miami, but great game against Michigan, wonderful against Indiana. And yeah, I think that's a wonderful way to start your defensive line next
So
year.
Kenyatta Jackson reminds me a little bit of my favorite pro team, the Bengals. They have Joseph Osai and Miles Murphy. They're a couple years apart, but Murphy is probably the one I would compare Kenyatta to the most in that he came in with like, hey, you're just going to be the next guy. You're going to be the next guy to be the guy, right? And maybe Kenyatta hasn't done exactly that just yet, but the things you see along the way, and I think even last year, as obviously a second fiddle behind JTT and Jack Sawyer, even last year you saw in 24 you saw some progress, and then this year obviously bookending with Caden Curry. The interesting thing with him was it seems like you wonder if Matt Patricia gave him the go ahead to say this, but about halfway through the season, he said, I want to be unleashed. And he said that to the media. And they all kind of like, oh, okay, Kenyatta, okay. And then he started getting after the quarterback more.
Mm-hmm.
So before that, it feels like he was kind of playing that role of setting the edge and that kind of thing and making sure that Damon Williams didn't get outside and that kind of thing. Whereas later in the season, he was more of a factor in the pass rush. So I think that's pretty good. All right. Let's talk about the problem with the portal. Okay. Over 1,500 people in the portal. There was something like I heard one of the ESPN guys on a podcast yesterday say that there's enough people in the portal to fill an entire conference. And so it is a problem. It's not a problem. You can have your opinion however you want. Um, the problem, as I see it, is several reasons. Number one, it's not NFL free agency, all right? Like the NFL free agency is set up for media to be able to descend on teams and say, "Hey, they're getting this guy like a week before they even sign," right? There's a legal tampering period, which is an oxymoron, right? But but they're allowed to be that way the week before you can officially sign. All right, that's not the way it technically is in college football. Now, do I think the day the portal opened, if you see a guy commit to another school that day, does that mean he never talked to the school he's going to before that day? That I get it. I get it. But we get as fans of the game, you can get all in a tizzy. Like, all these guys are leaving and they haven't gotten anybody yet. And it's like, well, wait a minute. Just calm down a little bit and things will come. Ohio State, as we know, has this week is starting to roll out with some pretty good signings. So I think it's clear that we need to be more patient as a fan base as a whole of the game of college football. Um, College coaches don't know ahead of time who will be available. In the NFL, you know when a guy's contract is up, and a guy could be franchise tagged, but that's it. Like if a guy's contract's up, he's fair game, and that's not really the way it is. And of course, the other issue would be, there's going to be guys in the portal that don't find landing spots. It's a game of musical chairs, and they're going to be guys left out in the cold.
Yeah, there will be players that return to their schools because they didn't get a good offer that they wanted. That necessarily, some will be left out in the cold. You're right; they'll fill their spot, but some guys they'll have room for that'll come back. I mean, we've seen that at a number of schools, including Michigan retaining Zeke Berry, who was one of their better players in the back end of the defense. And yeah, you and I had cautioned that from the very beginning. Don't panic. There's going to be a lot of names thrown at you. It's very chaotic. I'm just a firm believer in general in life that the market will sort itself out now that we're sort of transitioning to a little bit more of a capitalistic system in college football. Is that this is the early Wild West days, as we've talked about, and it'll figure itself out. The problem with the chaos is everybody's on a 1 year deal, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like you said, there's no way to predict that, okay, something is stable for like at least 2 years, maybe even three on a player's contract in the NFL. And this is just, once those dates open, all hell breaks loose, essentially. And so you're doing a lot of things on the fly, but I just always have faith in a good organization. And as I've stated on this program, I think Notre Dame and Ohio State both benefit from the fact that they just have good people in charge. And you're going to lose some pieces and gain some pieces. I think what's gone under the radar is the fact that Notre Dame got Keon Kelly,
Mm-hmm.
defensive end. There was a 5-star that went to Alabama. Ohio State got a couple guys from Alabama, including a defensive lineman themselves in James Smith. And you lose some, you gain some. And I would have faith if I'm the supporter of the Buckeyes or the Irish that my coaching staff and my people behind the scenes know what they're doing, and that's why we win games every year.
Yeah, they rebuilt the safety position pretty much with Earl Little and a young man from Duke. You mentioned the idea of Wild Wild West and things like that. Like, and I want your comment on how this affects fan interest here in a moment. But college basketball, when the portal started being a thing, had this happen immediately. NIL in the portal, right? That college basketball with fewer players on a roster, more recognizable situation where it's like, hey, wait a minute, that team I had last year that I thought was going to be around for 2, 3, 4 years, they're gone. In some cases, 70, 80, 90% of rosters get blown up year to year already these last 3 or 4 years in college basketball. It's starting to happen that way in college football. It just took a little while to really start happening. And so I guess one thing I want to talk about before we get into the fan situation, it really, with it becoming year to year, Brian, the situation is, hey, a really highly regarded recruit Ohio State had at safety, and Fahim Delane came for 1 year, and then he left. Okay. So if I look at the scope of what Fahim Delane could become, and he may be going to join his brother at LSU, I don't know. But if I look at that scope, I might say he has bigger upside than Earl Little Jr. But for 2026, what do I think? And I think you opt with the experienced guy, Earl Little Jr., right? So, and I don't even know they'll play exactly the same spot. There's discussion of where the two new safeties will play, whether it's slot corner or more of a deep safety outside the box. But your thoughts on that? Because I think if you're Ryan Day, if you're Marcus Freeman, you have to start treating it like it is year to year, and maybe treating it like it's actually a helpful thing that I can actually go get something where I don't have experience or maybe the talent I thought I had.
And isn't that a philosophical conundrum that
It
everyone's
is.
having to address now? Is that we'll watch Indiana and Miami play on Monday for the national championship, and they have a bunch of 1 year rentals. And so next year they'll have to go find those same position players to fill in. And Ohio State has generally, since this all began several years ago, been of the mind that we still want to conduct our business through high school recruiting and the evaluation of talent on a multi-year basis with augmenting position needs. And now, again, with it being a little more chaotic and with young players just choosing to leave, you're going to be forced to adapt a little bit into the Indiana and Miami model, just to use them as examples because they're doing so well. And so, how do you handle that paradigm shift is going to be very important because Seth, I think to some degree you're right in terms of, yeah, we all watched Fahim Delane, for example, be a highly recruited player that you thought, hey man, they got Caleb Downs and some other safeties that are sort of ahead of him. Obviously, McLean played well this year, but hey man, in a couple years he's going to be something, right? Practices with those guys, gets with Matt Patricia, learns the playbook a little bit, and then after 1 year, he just doesn't want to wait, and so then you're forced to go get two safeties, obviously more from Duke and then obviously little from Florida State. And so the question becomes, you know, is it because a player leaves or is it because you're just going to choose to be better for 1 year because a guy's further along in his development? There's also going to be, Seth, that notion
Yeah.
of are you essentially going to recruit over a guy who you like his potential? Obviously, Delane's a different situation, but I think that'll happen too.
Well, and it could have been a case, and we don't know. As if you're a fan of a team and you just want to tell yourself all the time that my team can do no wrong, you may go toward this opinion more often that, hey, I bet they told Fahim Delane, we're going to recruit more out of the portal at your position. If you can win the job, great, but we're not guaranteeing you anything. It's kind of like what I heard they told Kyle McCord when Kyle
Mhm.
McCord made an ultimatum and they said, no, we're going in the portal for a quarterback, and it's not just going to be a guy to hold a clipboard necessarily. It's going to be a guy that will challenge for the job. And the word is that Kyle McCord, that's when he said, I'm leaving. I I don't know if that's official. I think that again, that could be Ohio State fans spinning it a certain way, right? I don't know how that conversation took place, but the other side of it is you make these judgments, right? And a lot of this is on the fly. So you hope Mark Pantoni and all of his staff that's dedicated to scouting current players in college football, you hope they found guys that can get the job done because you get this window of the portal opening. Now, when the portal closes tomorrow, we're recording on Thursday, January 15th. The portal closing doesn't mean that guys won't commit somewhere. It just means you can't enter the portal anymore. So then it'll just be guys trying to find spots. But we mentioned it last week. Ethan Oniamwa from Rice, the tackle. End of the day, my opinion, if he's the guy and I hate to say it this way, but it's true, if he's the guy you paid him to be, then maybe the whole thing's a little different against Indiana and Miami for Ohio State because Austin Saraveld's suddenly playing inside where he's better, and you have more guys to kind of work with there. And he never, from day one, my son Joey last night was asking me about him, and I go, Joey, they brought him in. They thought he was going to be the starting left tackle, and from day one at spring practice or whenever it was they brought him in, he just wasn't. He just wasn't. So you don't know that until the season rolls around, but you got to be wary of that as well.
Well, and philosophically, also, we're getting into the notion that I think we've all been wrestling with as college football fans about, are we treating these human beings as adults or children?
Mm-hmm.
And we used to always call them kids when they were student athletes and all that sort of business, and sort of um, give them a little more room to develop and a little more patience and a little more grace. But to be honest with you, now that we're paying them and they're demanding more money and they're leaving left and right, I think they're going to be viewed more as adults. And that includes our criticism of the fact that, nothing personally against, you know, that gentleman from Rice, but he didn't perform.
Mm-hmm.
So we're in a big boy world now. And so next guy. And so I think as consumers of the product, which we're going to get into our discussion here a little bit now, your mind just changes a little bit because these guys now are kind of on the job to some degree, and they are going to get treated like the rest of us out in the world.
All right, so let's get to that. Okay, you and I. Now, people need to understand we've been having this podcast for 24 years now. We met in 2002. You and I have been having this podcast over the phone or at lunch sometime together for all these years. So people are just now getting to look behind the curtain, so to speak. But you and I think, are a little bit different as fans. Even back in the Jim Tressel years, we would relish scoring a ticket to, maybe the Western Michigan game or the Bowling Green game or whoever it is they're playing early in the season that's not really going to give them much trouble, because we get to see those guys that will be future starters come off the bench. Well, now that's just, I mean, it's not really happening that way anymore. The percentage of players that come in as freshmen and wait 3 years to start is not going to happen at a place like Ohio State. Certainly, I think that started earlier at Georgia. Kirby Smart has made it known the last couple of years. He had guys that were backups that used to just roll right into being starters. That's how they won back-to-back titles, because his backups in 21 were probably as good as the starters. And then the next year they got to prove it. But we're not going to see that as much anymore. And so even though we're kind of different, you and I, as I think we look at the sport a little different because we always enjoyed, hey, how good is this going to be? And you and I would try to pick. I was wrong about Robert Rose. I admit that every time. I thought he was going to be a stud. Defensive end, for those of you who don't remember Robert. But what are your thoughts overall? The fan base as a whole of all of college football, especially the Blue Bloods, are we at risk of losing out like on a group of fans who just kind of walk away?
You and I had a probably hour-long conversation on the phone about this the other day, and I think that this is a conversation that is slowly but surely taking place in friend groups, at the office, at the game, for people who care. Is that we're starting to inch a little bit in the mercenary direction of college basketball and the NBA, and maybe even Major League Baseball, that has put those sports, which were very much higher on the pecking order when, say, people of our generation were younger, to the point where football has overtaken all of them, because you just don't know the human beings. They're
Mm-hmm.
in and out of your life so quickly. And while we all generally cheer for uniforms, which is very true, it's still much easier to do that when you know the human beings. But so many of them are in, like, college basketball. You and I are sports nuts, but I'm to the point where, like, if I've heard of 25% of the people in the draft for the
Yeah,
NBA, it's a
that's
miracle. And that's astonishing when you think about how we grew up and knowing like every single player in the draft, basically. And so I'm a little concerned about that for football as we get into a more, transition period of guys coming and going all the time. And on top of that, Seth, we're also being asked to foot the bill more.
mhm.
You know, the price of tickets has gone up to a lot of games. A hoodie costs $125. Now I've got to pay for, I don't have to, but I'm asked to pay for NIL so my team can retain players. Then I have to get 17 streaming services to watch my team play every week. And so I think the sport is asking a lot of its consumers, and they're starting to be stretched a little thin. And then we have X amount of playoff games that, could be a vacation for me 20 years ago to one bowl game. Now it's like, well, how many do I go to? And so I think that college football needs to be a little bit careful. And again, the market will correct itself, in my view. Like, I think we're already seeing the average person. I mean, Mark Cuban and, Phil Knight, the billionaires, like, hey, they're going to bankroll a team at Oregon and Indiana, and God bless them. But I think the average guy is like, dude, I'm not going to contribute $1,000 this year to NIL because
Mm.
I've already had to spend that going to games, streaming services, buying sweatshirts for my kids for Christmas. I worry that we're headed a little bit in that direction, and dude, that's been disastrous for college basketball.
It has. I think you mentioned baseball in there as well, but I think so. I'm a diehard Cincinnati Reds fan, have been my whole life, and so for me, I know the players on the board, right, on the the chessboard or whatever. I follow it so closely that I never lost track. Whereas me as an NBA fan, there's plenty of NBA fans that are diehards. They know all those European guys that are coming over. They know the one and done guy from a school I didn't watch all year. They're more tapped in. Or when they get to the NBA, now they make them part of their lives. I'm at the point with the NBA where I can barely turn on a TV and even know if there's 10 starters, I might know 3 of them, 4 of them. Like SGA, right? The guy from Oklahoma City wins the MVP last year. That's all. The only way I knew is because I heard the 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 name the name being SGA. Like, oh, who's that? It took me a long time to understand even who they're talking about. Um, that can happen. You're right, and it has happened in college basketball. But college basketball it started happening because of one and dones and things like
Mhm.
that. And in football, that's the difference is they have to stay out of they can't go to the NFL till they've been out of high school 3 years. And that used to mean you've got them at Ohio State for 3 years minimum, and then you got to know them. Now, Jeremiah Smith looks like he's going to be all 3 years at Ohio State, which as a fan we're happy about. But there are guys who, when they get drafted, you're going to say, "Oh yeah, he was once here, but never actually played," and so I didn't get to know him as well. So yes, it's all very interesting. It's things to talk about throughout the off season. They're at a spot too, though, where and baseball suffers from this. Baseball can put up record numbers as far as somehow they get more TV audience than they used to, like 5, 10 years ago. But it's being chiseled away because it's the younger fan that's not getting into the game, right? So you wonder in 10 years will that be there? And so we'll have to monitor that with college football, but that's going to be over a much longer period of time before we can really figure out if it's happened.
Yeah, and there's a cultural touchstone to it as well. I mean, we all tell stories about our own lives, and the thing I remember is going to college in the late '90s. You would go to a party at Ohio State at girls' apartments, and there would be Major League Baseball playoff games on.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, or there would be like Michael Jordan playing in the playoffs for the Bulls.
Hmm.
And nowadays, I can't speak for young people, but being an adult going to somebody's house, I can't tell you the last time I went to somebody's house and a Major League Baseball or an NBA game were on.
Yeah, unless it's
And
unless
but
it's the local
college
team.
football is not like that. College football, I go to people's houses just to watch that kind of a game.
Yeah.
But the the debate becomes, will college football become that
Hmm.
if they not necessarily take care of their consumer, but again, like I said, they stretch their consumer too thin that the consumer just goes to something else. That's the concern.
All right. Well, Brian Inglis and I are solving the world's problems one episode at a time. Congratulations to Notre Dame on a continued good portal class. Next week, we're going to look to kind of try to hash out all of the portal additions because that's still in the process for places like Ohio State and Notre Dame. Maybe we'll make a list and we'll go over who we think the better additions are and things like that. And a little homework for you and I, but we'll figure it out. Brian, thanks so much for sitting down with me yet again. We're having a great time on this show. Everybody out there, if you're listening or watching, please like, subscribe, do all those things, but tell friends about us, okay? If you're a Notre Dame or a Ohio State fan, we want to hear from you, and we want to be your place for information on the two programs that we believe will be atop the mountain in college football for years to come. Have a great day, Brian.
Thanks, you too, Seth, and thank you all for being here.
All right, thanks for tuning in.